Thanks very much. I suppose I just want to go back a bit over old ground. I suppose we've had a discussion there with Deputy Costello and Deputy Boyland about the prepay and the protection of customers. Now, I've just had a text from a customer who tells me that, a prepay customer, that the standing charge for one of these prepay meters has gone up in the last couple of weeks from 120 a day to 150 a day, which might sound like the price of a cup of flat white coffee to some people, but over the course of a week, it's more than a tenner. And that's a lot for people who are vulnerable and poor and living because they have to, on a day-to-day basis, put in money in a meter. Could you comment on that? Did you know about it? Was there an application put into you to say, can we raise these prices, or how does it work? Because it strikes me that 25% of an increase in the standing charge for our most vulnerable sections of the population is something that should have been brought to your attention, and that you should have been able to say, no, you can't do that. Not at the current time, at least, because of the overall costs of energy are soaring so much that this is an absolutely unfair burden on that section of the population. And there's a wider thing that strikes me as this meeting goes on, as I listen to the answers to all the various questions. The discussion about well-designed markets being a real tool to deliver change around security, sustainability and price is really very questionable when you look at the soaring costs to the ordinary people in this country at the moment. It's very, very questionable, that statement that you've just made. But also it's becoming more and more apparent that the role of CRU is to really make sure that the future is funded, as in, you know, the ability to move to 95% renewables. Absolutely, totally agree with that. Wonderful, and all the rest of it. That the future for the private energy market is funded so that they can connect to the national grid as they move to deliver renewable energies. But where is the criteria that demands of those renewable energy companies that they must pay for all of that facilitation by the population to prepare them to be able to step into this market? And I ask you that because I recently attended a seminar where a global expert on energy told us there is nowhere in the world, he said, that renewable energy is delivered by private companies without a huge cost to the state into which they deliver that energy. So in other words, I just think this idea that well-designed markets are a real tool to deliver change is absolutely nonsense. We had a thing called the ESB here before it was deregulated that provided us with the cheapest electricity in Europe, that turned on the lights everywhere up and down the country. Without this sort of, as you said yourself, markets are getting more and more complex. Why all this complexity? This is an essential service that society needs for the wheels to turn, for people to live, for hospitals to function, for schools to function, for people to stay warm. And yet it's becoming one of the most complex, profitable sections of activity in this country. And I think that the regulators' name is really failing them unless they step in and do something about this.
Okay, we'll invite them to respond to some very interesting questions there.
Thank you very much, Deputy Smith. So just in respect of price increases, whether it's for prepay or bill pay customers, the requirement is that the customers are given a 30-day notification of any price increase. There is no requirement for suppliers to seek approval or otherwise from CRU. It is and has been for many years a competitive market, and what keeps price pressure on, if you like, is the fact that if customers see price increases, they will vote with their feet and go to cheaper offerings. So in terms of the particular price increase that you're referring to, I'm not sure that I had specific knowledge of that, but it is not a requirement for the companies to seek approval or otherwise from us. And I do absolutely acknowledge the challenge that increasing prices, whether it's standing charges or unit charges, whether prepay or bill pay, this is really, really difficult for customers. I fully acknowledge that. What is driving this is the global, or what's particularly European price increase in the cost of gas. that is obviously having a direct impact for gas bills, and it is having an equal impact on electricity, because gas is one of our primary fuels for power generation. So it is driven by those factors. And while competition can keep downward pressure, it can ensure that companies pass on price reductions as quickly as possible. It can ensure that they offer as much value and choice as they can to to their customers and to attract new customers. It cannot eliminate that underlying cost surge that we've seen that is unprecedented in the gas markets in Europe. And I mean, you will be aware that ministers at an EU level and all energy regulators at an EU level are working collaboratively to see what can we do, which is why we have the toolkit. And many of the tools are around supporting competitive markets on the basis that this is what will mitigate the best we can the impacts for customers. So the toolkit includes options to support switching for customers. And obviously interventions, which again we're very happy to support, around the €200 electricity credit. What is driving the complexity is really that customers want different things from electricity supplies. So they want better information. They want the ability to control their costs or have knowledge of their costs, to understand what is driving, consumption in their home and what they can do to reduce that consumption. We know that customers are, for example, very keen to get involved in microgeneration. A lot of the complexity will come from exporting and payments for export. So that's a new set of complexity. Many of the deputies here spoke about how about customers being able to engage in some of the market activities. This is what is driving the complexity. And I suppose at the heart of that then, I think the onus is on us to also make this navigable for customers, and particularly customers, maybe who don't have the ability to, let's say, invest in microgeneration, or don't have the ability to retrofit their homes or whatever they might wish to do. But give them simple things like time of use tariffs, where you say, well, look, I won't turn on the washing machine between 5 and 7 o'clock because that's expensive. I'll turn it on after 8 o'clock because that's cheap. Really simple things like that, and making it simple for customers, which I agree, there's an absolute onus on us, I think, to provide that clarity and simplicity of choice for customers in the context of increasing complexity. I might turn to Jim on the renewable costs, if you wanted to come in on that one. I think the question was around the fact that it's private companies, but supported by state intervention, I think, Deputy Smith. Yeah.
It is, and again, I think my colleague John Melvin mentioned earlier that where it is national policy to meet a climate target, and that's supported by the delivery of renewables, and that's now aligned to a Climate Act that is legally binding. It is a matter of creating a competitive process to generate the best price that consumers in the state will then have to support as we meet that national climate goal for 2030. That's again linked to the legally binding Climate Act. The department run the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. We advise them with regard to competition and competition ratios, but again, it is to provide a competitive market to make sure that whomever wins and delivers, that they have bid in as competitively as possible and that a competitive price is secured.
Okay, thank you. I think that was all your questions, Deputy Smith. I won't presume that they were answered as satisfactory.
I would have loads more questions, but I'm not getting answers that I think I can accept as being reasonable in light of the crisis that we're facing. So I'm kind of giving up at this stage. I think I'll go back and talk to the people who are suffering the most and try and mobilise a bit of attention on what the government and crew are doing or not doing to help them.
I might add to your question, Deputy Smith, to ask the regulator to go back to that trilemma that we've talked about of decarbonisation, energy security or independence, and indeed the cost of energy to the consumer. it seems that to me that Ireland's in this unique position that our decarbonisation potential can serve those other two challenges. That I suppose it behoves us to expedite the decarbonisation so that we actually, we can create our own energy, we can control that system, that market, and we're not relying, as we're seeing at the moment, on fossil fuels from Russia, which are actually driving energy costs and are impacting on people's energies, their energy costs, and having a detrimental impact on energy poverty as well. So I'm just wondering about the CRU's position. Like, obviously you're bound by that policy framework that is there, and pursuing that, I would say, diligently. But are you undertaking any analysis, or is there a position of the CRU, I suppose, with respect to accelerating or expediting that decarbonisation challenge, which it is very difficult, there's no question about that. There's so much that needs to be done to get to where we say we want to go, let alone to get there quicker. But is it something that we need to look at? Is there an analysis being done, and does the CRU perhaps have a position that perhaps is more ambitious than, say, the government's at the moment?
So I think, again, as an economic regulator, we follow government policy. We report to yourselves, we follow government policy. We are ambitious with regard to decarbonisation. We are ambitious with regard to making sure that the lights stay on. In order to access the economic opportunity that is in our climate ambitions, that is in our climate action plan, and again treating it not just as an imposition to reach a target, but treating it as an opportunity to again generate ultimately wealth, things need to be built. And if they are interconnectors, or if they are wires onshore, if they are onshore wind farms, if they are offshore wind farms, if they are smart meters to make sure that people can contribute and benefit from same, if ultimately it is gas or decarbonised gas pipelines, this is infrastructure that needs to be built to bring kilowatt hours and energy to our citizens. And we want to decarbonise that also. Where investment is required to build this infrastructure, that has to come from somewhere. And that is the key challenge that we face. It is to make sure that when we invest, to get to that point where we are decarbonised, we are less exposed to the vagaries of the international energy market, and we can export to our national benefit, we will need to invest. We will need infrastructure. And we want it delivered as cost effectively as possible, whether that is through our network companies or through the suppliers that operate in the market. And as it's delivered cost effectively, we want to protect the consumers in their interaction with those suppliers in that marketplace. So it is a challenge, but to reach that place where we are accessing this opportunity, infrastructure is required and investment is required.
Okay, thank you. I'm very happy to hear you state that very clearly.